Dear audience and respected guests, those of us who are here with us in person and all the viewers who are watching this live on the University of Bangladesh page and the Circle Space page. I'd like to welcome you all to the ULAB Literary Salon organized by the Department of Humanities at the University of Bangladesh. I am Aanchal Malhotra, adjunct faculty at the department at ULAB as well as at Ferdous. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our guests and speakers for today. The department at ULAB as well as Ferdous. We have extended a very warm welcome to our speakers for today. The department at ULAB as well as Ferdous. We have extended a very warm welcome to our speakers for today. The department at ULAB as well as our apologies for the interruption. Hopefully, things will run on smoothly. As I was saying, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this week's ULAB Literary Salon organized by the Department of English and Humanities at ULAB. I would like to thank our special guests who are joining us in person and virtually. We have with us as well Professor Aanchal Malhotra, Special Advisor to the Board of Trustees at ULAB. We have Associate Professor Rituparna Roy, Head of the Department of English and Humanities, students, visitors, guests. Every year we try to bring you the ULAB Literary Salon in an effort to discuss topics that are timely, that are urgent. Perhaps no other topic is as urgent as freedom of speech. And with writers of both fiction and non-fiction, with artists, journalists, advocates, human rights advocates, constantly and increasingly being under attack for their choice to speak truth to power, the discussion for freedom of expression has become more important than ever. To talk about these issues, to unpack these issues, we have with us today one of the most eminent advocates of human rights in Bangladesh, who is also coordinator of media reporting and trustee of the Center for Policy Dialogue CPT. Joining us virtually is Mr. Zaman, editor of Dhaka Tribune. We also have with us from all the way from Delhi, Ms. Aanchal, who is the editorial director of Sayeed in India and South Asia, and usually a moderator of these conversations, but joining us today as a panelist to share his expertise and his experience with the topic. We have Mr. South Asia analyst, columnist, author, and journalist with us. Without further ado, can I please invite our guests in person to join us? Hi, Safar. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, sure. Sarah would lead you in shortly.
I'm having a slightly hard time still following the central the gaps with the microphone. So if you could.
Yeah, we're good to go now. As I was saying, the reason why we came up with this month's theme to be freedom of speech is, of course, the attack on Salman Rushdie. That was the first thing that started this conversation. But even in Bangladesh, we are constantly under threat. Our journalists, our writers, our artists, and there are so many issues related to ethnic minorities, religious minorities, minorities of gender and class that are constantly under threat in Bangladesh. So I think I wanted to start with Khushi Madam, if you could share your thoughts with us that, freedom of speech in itself is not so much a topic as it is the need to talk about certain pressing issues. So what are some of the things that you believe are, they need urgent, they're urgently in need of conversation?
Okay, thank you. Thank you everybody who's as well as those who are virtually there, as well as those who will be either now or at later on hearing us to the live stream and then the video. And I found that topic, the way you worded it, very interesting. Is truth or dare. And I don't know who thought of it, but it was
Shudipta.
so the fear and freedom of expression. Now, I think if I, and you, when you wrote to me and asked me about it, you talked about not in just the Bangladesh context, but in South Asia, and what is present now, and the manifestation in both literature, art, and our culture. As you mentioned very correctly, someone who's very active on human rights, working with people, especially the most marginalized and the ones who are excluded within society, within state, etc. And as citizens, my later work for the most portion of my life, I think 2/3 of my life have been dedicated in working with these communities, that as citizens, they have the same right as I, maybe more privileged. If I speak too fast, my English is too fast, please tell me to slow down sometimes. When I get carried away, I speak too fast. Don't hesitate, just tell me to go slower, and I do that. So it's, as I said, I feel very strongly that every citizen, as per a constitution, has a right. And it shouldn't be a matter of one's class, privilege, or whether how well known one is. It should be just what the constitution guarantees us. And along with that, I will say that Bangladesh is unique in the sense that the people of this country fought for liberation. It was not negotiated. Independence of Bangladesh was not a negotiated independence. There have been independence struggles in many countries in the world, in our region, but eventually the actual independence itself was very often, most of the places negotiated, except, and I think this is a uniqueness globally that Bangladesh has, that the people fought and really fought and won. Each area was liberated till Bangladesh got liberated. So for a country that the people gave those who gave their lives, they gave their lives for, those who took the challenge of not knowing how long the struggle would be, how many, what they would have to give up, whether they would survive, that risk that everyone took to create this Bangladesh had certain values which made people want to give their, take this risk. And the values were democracy. It was, our identity was secularism, and it was socialism, which meant that the kind of extreme gap between and the thing that existed, between those who had the ability and money, and those who did not have it, would not designate as well. So when we talk about democracy, it's also the right and the freedom of being able to express oneself. Now, paradoxically, I just say the same, that the region is going to a problematic situation right now. I Asia, including Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Maldives. The question of freedom of speech, the expression, is not something that is very healthy. I mean, all my friends in India are many have been in jail, and one who recently managed to get bail to struggle. So, and I can see that each one of them are going through this phase of not knowing who's going to be next. And people speak feeling the need to start how much can they express themselves freely in what kind of a media or medium. Pakistan is the same. Sri Lanka, with the recent events that are happening, I think that's, and before that, when the Tamil and the Sinhala conflict happened, the Tamils had to face the same kind of fear. In Nepal, it's a much better situation, but there's a lot of conflict and confusion as to how will they take the democracy further, because that they fought for a democratic, for a monarchy, they fought and got a democracy, but still unsure as to what does that democracy actually mean. And if you talk about Afghanistan, I think I don't have to mention it, everyone knows what the situation in Afghanistan is now, and especially for women, but anybody who thinks, I'll just say, anyone who thinks Pakistan is in that situation. Old age is very difficult. You don't see the kind of expression that you think should be there. Bhutan, which is considered the most happiest index with the happiest index, and I think there is conflict and problems there if you are not Bhutan, if you're not from, if you're Nepalis and Bhutanese, because there are many people in Bhutan who for centuries are Bhutanese, but they are ethnically Nepali. So they have a lot of problems where they have no expression. So if you say about all these countries that we don't hear about, that problem exists. But what is problematic now, more than any other time, and I think that sessions that I go move further into it, is when we were young, I think, when I was young, I would say, when we were young, this was what was happening. So now I say that I've joined the senior citizens. When we were young, the world had a whole group, and it was very strong that the youth and students were very vocal and empowered. They took over universities. It was a place and a time where music flourished, where art flourished, where thought flourished, where literature flourished, where poetry flourished, and where movements grew. And we were part of that era. Unfortunately, now that movement doesn't exist. Unfortunately, now the majority is just the opposite. Those who speak out, those who are creative, those who think are a minority. And that's why your title, Truth or Dare, the fear and freedom of expression, is so apt. Because at our time, we did not have the fear to speak out. We did not have the fear of acting out what we believed in, which now I think those who do, I'm not saying they don't exist, they do, but they are a minority and are often facing so much harassment. And the human rights angle, very much so. But I think even in the creative side, because I don't know, most of the audience here may not know, but my degree, the only degree I have is in painting and drawing, fine arts. So, as somebody who has come from that background and who loves literature and who loves music, and you know, I feel that keeps me grounded. This, you know, the scenario of now and what was is a great difference. I bet.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Krishi Madam. Some of these issues that you talked about, the reason behind this difference that you talked about from your generation to what we have today is just this immense shrinking of safe spaces to speak out, and also an immense polarization of opinions. You know, there's always this narrative of us versus them. If you express anything that is different from the mainstream narrative, you are painted as being against certain groups. Mr. Zafar Soman, I'd like to come to you now. As the editor of a national newspaper, you know, you're at one of the most, you know, probably complex positions to communicate these issues, to communicate these scenarios, and also to curate how these issues will be presented to the public. So what are your thoughts and how do you navigate these struggles, if you could please tell us?
Thank you very much. I think when we talk about freedom of expression and freedom of the press here in Bangladesh, what I've noticed even more, and we all know what's happened here in Bangladesh, in the region, globally, in terms of the shrinking of space. And a lot of that is a function of governmental action. So in the context, we talk about the Digital Security Act, shrunk the space for freedom of expression. There are one or two other media laws which are right now being debated, or not really debated. You know, I was going to say they're being debated in Parliament, but what's going to happen is they're being debated behind closed doors, and they will be passed by Parliament very shortly. But I think that, you know, in the past, we have always had governments with an interest in restricting freedom of expression. And this may be in Bangladesh, maybe elsewhere. What I find is a much more worrisome trend is I feel that reverence for freedom of expression, that bedrock understanding is in everyone's interest. It doesn't matter whether you're left wing, right wing. This is common ground on which we can all agree. That consensus has diminished. And I'll give you what I think is a very interesting example of this, is that when I started in the media 2 decades back, I was the op-ed page editor at the Daily Star, which is still the biggest English language newspaper in Bangladesh. And in the last 10 years, I have been the editor of Dhaka Tribune. And so I'm very familiar with the op-ed, the comment analysis space. That's really sort of in terms of newspapers, that's my home, that's where I've come from. It's one of the things which I have really tried to make a centerpiece of what we do in Dhaka Tribune. And one of the things which I had learned at the Daily Star, and I've brought over with me to the Tribune, is the notion that we would seek to be a platform for differing viewpoints. Even viewpoints which I myself as editor may disagree with are viewpoints which still find space on the comment analysis op-ed pages of my newspaper, simply because the idea is that that we provide a platform, we provide a space for the free expression of ideas, for discussion of issues, and people will disagree on these issues. So if there's any issue which needs to be debated, you can provide differing viewpoints on it. And again, once upon a time, not long ago, I'm talking maybe a decade ago, this position which was taken was understood by the general public and respected and valued. And people agreed. They said, you know, they understand that the price of being able to express my opinion on this subject is also having to give space and listen to and read alternate, differing opinions. And, you know, that's a price which is worth paying. And so the idea is to try and, you know, have right-of-center pieces, left-of-center pieces, centrist pieces on whatever issues, whether you talk about religion, whether you talk about politics in Bangladesh, whether you say Awami League, BNP, whether we're talking about, you know, any issue at all, okay? But what I have found in the last several years is tolerance for these alternative viewpoints has completely shrunk. So now no one actually agrees that the point of an op-ed page is to provide this platform. So you have people, so if the minute they see an article which they disagree with, they are up in arms and they are furious that this article has been platformed. What is this article doing in your newspaper? How can you publish something like this without understanding that the price of being able to publish something from their point of view as an editor is to be able to publish this alternative point of view. And I'm trying to balance these things out. And so, you know, it used to be that people would understand that that it was the job of a newspaper to be a platform for differing opinions. Now what happens is everyone is mad, okay? So if you publish a variety of opinions, all of the people on the left are mad that you're publishing the opinions of the people on the right. All of the people on the right are mad that you're publishing the opinions on the left. All of the Awami Leaguers are mad that you're publishing any person who may be sympathetic towards the BNP. All the BNPers are mad that you're publishing stuff which is sympathetic towards the Awami League. In the end, what ends up is you've made everyone mad. No one likes anything which they're reading because the appetite for reading any opposing point of view has dropped just about to zero. And I've seen this phenomenon, not just here in Bangladesh. Part of my job, of course, is, you know, I follow the media, I follow intellectual discourse in newspapers, in journals, on television shows, radios, what have you, all over the world. So, you know, whether it's next door in India, whether it's in the UK or Europe, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in the US. And I see that this is really where discourse has got to in 2022. People no longer have this sense that, you know, that we should all meet in a neutral ground and everyone should have the ability to express themselves. And, you know, in some ways, I feel that this is always something we struggled with in Bangladesh because, you know, and not just in Bangladesh, in the region, if you look at the laws we have on our books, and this is, you know, you have laws against outraging people's religious sentiments, which is 1926 British era law, but it's still on the books in Bangladesh, and I believe in India and Pakistan as well. I'm not sure about that, but I do know it's still on the books here in Bangladesh. And if you look at, you know, you talked about Salman Rushdie and the Satanic Verses, which was kind of the hook for this discussion we're having. Way back when the Satanic Verses was first published in, I think, 1988, the first opposition was really brought by South Asians, the sort of organizational opposition, South Asians living in the UK. And then, of course, you know, it spiraled beyond that. And of course, you know, we also have this problem here in Bangladesh. Not long ago, we had a spate of killings of intellectuals, and I wrote about that, and many other people wrote about it. We had Avijit Roy, we had Washikur Rahman, and the point I had made in an op-ed I wrote at the time was that while many people may, of course, say that, well, you know, we draw the line supporting violence against people who speak their mind, the notion that certain ideas are out of bounds and certain ideas should not be expressed, and that if you do express them, really you have only yourself to blame, and you should be responsible for the consequences of your speech. That is actually very widespread. Certainly, it has been for a long time in this part of the world, our part of the world. And what I see, interestingly, is this is now spread. I'd always thought, if you'd asked me a couple of decades ago, that slowly, you know, these ideas would we'd move in the direction of tolerance, we'd move in the direction of openness. But what I have seen, over the last few years, and it manifests itself in many ways in the academy in the West, is that things are moving in the opposite direction. Now you have a strong notion that certain utterances are verboten. There's certain conversations which is better not to be had. And I just feel we're just moving globally in the wrong direction when it comes to freedom of expression. It's not just here. They're not just here in this part of the world. Of course, as I mentioned, the DSA, we have in fact now codified, certain viewpoints is being out of bounds, where we talk about, well, anything which is against the spirit of the liberation war, which is, a sort of marvelously vague and arbitrary sort of criteria to use, and anything can really come under it. And then if anything you say can be interpreted to upset, I mentioned the religious feelings, really any feelings at all, then that person has the right to bring a case against you. And we see this constantly. We have people being hauled before magistrates and in fact put behind bars routinely here. So this is, I think, in the year 2022, it is a fundamental problem we're facing globally. And the sad thing from my perspective is I feel that we seem to have been going in the wrong direction. I think this is something which Khushi was alluding to. We have this idea that on certain issues we'll march towards enlightenment, we'll march towards tolerance, but it doesn't actually seem to be that way. Certainly not on this particular issue. And I think for me, that's the most appropriate framework through which to view this. But what's really worrisome to me is that a decade ago or 2 decades ago, the people who I would have thought of would be my natural allies in this battle now kind of no longer are. I sort of look around and I find that the number of people who truly believe in freedom of expression, even for freedom of expression for views which you yourself find abhorrent and don't like, has diminished remarkably. And that really seems to be the new mindset of the 21st century. And I feel that, this is a battle which is worth fighting, but sometimes I feel, it may be a losing war. And I think that there are many other values of the 20th century, of tolerance, pluralism, democracy, which I feel are in retreat in the 21st century, which is, again, really shocking for those of us who have a progressive view of history, where we like to believe that history generally, intellectual history, progresses by and large in a positive direction. I think there's a Martin Luther King said that the arc of history bends towards justice, and we feel that intellectually, socially, politically, in terms of rights, that is certainly the trajectory we would like to see, in which, if you take the broad sweep of history, that is what we have seen over centuries and millennia. But now I feel that in many ways we're moving backwards, and that's something which causes me a great deal of concern. I think I'll leave it there for now, and let's hear what others have to say.
Thank you so much. One sentence that you said really stood out to me, which is that no one likes what they're reading. And, historically, perhaps the most useful way of addressing any of these issues has been through books. So I want to come to Ms. Himanjali Shankar as editorial director of Simon & Schuster, and you've also worked with several other leading publishing houses in India. Are books really an effective medium even to promote freedom of speech? And how do you think the books market in South Asia is developing on par with these issues?
Yeah, when we're talking about books, the way it sort of unfolds is very different from a newspaper, or even when you're talking about things which are happening on the ground, because books are supposed to be they are supposed to have a longer shelf life. So what you're writing is supposed to be something, it's not things which you're supposed to read and that it's being read and then, okay, in the next, then you move on to something else. So the whole, when we are commissioning a book even, we're looking at the shelf life and how it should be relevant for at least 5 years. So it's kind of interesting, because I was also, of course, to bring it to freedom of expression, and how in the course of the last maybe 10 years, I've seen how the way we approach books and how we commission has also changed. And it's probably, again, what Zafar was saying, it's the same thing of that closing down of the space when it comes to multiple viewpoints. So earlier, I think when it came to books, we didn't even really look at the political leanings of a person as much as, okay, this book is about whatever it is about. And is this a theme or is this a topic that we want to talk about, publish? But I think increasingly, any literature that's being presented to commissioning editors even, we do check out, this is like not check out, but we are very aware of the political leanings of the person who's going to be writing, because we are, everyone is very, very aware of not wanting to sort of put forth a certain viewpoint, depending on which side of the spectrum you come from. And that is kind of also unfortunate, because yeah, it is just closing the space down, and we're not, it's becoming an echo chamber where maybe I'm speaking about if I'm a left liberal, I want to only hear other left liberals. I'm blocking other people on Facebook or on wherever. I don't want to listen to them. And so it's just like we're creating these little bubbles in which we are living. And literature also, when the kind of literature we are producing, we're not giving space for each other. That's there. And I think, but okay, if you're specifically, let's talk about certain books which have caused this debate to be, I was thinking of again, everyone knows about The Hindus, right? By Wendy Doniger, which was published, I think, in 2011. And that's one of those watershed moments in Indian publishing where a lawsuit was brought forth against the publishers, Penguin in this case, and the author. And because the book was supposed to have offended the religious sentiments of Hindus. And that is supposed to be an action which is punishable by, by criminal prosecution. And that's a law, like I think again Zafar mentioned, but that's a law that's been there from the 1920s when the British brought in that law, which is section 295A of the Indian Penal Code. And okay, if I can quickly just go back a little, because this 295A, it came about in the 1920s when there was this book which was published by I forget the name of, read about it. There was a book which
Rangila Rasul.
Yeah, right, Rangila Rasul, which talks about Muhammad's life in a certain way, about his marriages and his sex life and all of that. And that book was the publisher was arrested, and but later he was acquitted because there is no law at that time. There was no law which was protecting insults to religion. So there was a demand for a law that would be protecting religious feelings, whichever community. So the British government had came up with section 295A, and which we are still using in India now, and that's what was used in the case of the Hindus. And interestingly, that law also had this thing called, like, quote unquote, deliberate and malicious intent. So apparently it differentiates between when you're offending religious sentiments deliberately and maliciously, as opposed to you're hurting religious sentiments for, say, social reform, which, I think that's there in the law, but I very much doubt whether that's being paid attention to, because, anyway, because that becomes another debate. And the Hindus was recalled by Penguin India. And that, of course, gave the publishers a lot of, they received a lot of flack. There were authors who, like Arundhati Roy or Jeeta, all of whom took back their books from the publisher. So that was the first instance of, I think, authors beginning to feel unsafe about what they were publishing. And this is, again, I'm also in a, what should I say, a multinational publishing house. So I cannot say that I cannot fault Penguin beyond the point, because I know there are many factors which operate and which work on a publisher when you take certain decisions. I cannot say that one should be abandoning authors. Definitely not. But again, I'm not sure of exactly the internal dynamics which leads to these decisions being taken. And so yeah, I mean, these are the considerations that one keeps in mind when, so after, I think the Hindus, especially, people have become more wary when commissioning, because you want to be able to stand up for the book which you're commissioning. And honestly, in India, I'm sure everywhere in the subcontinent, the publishing is a small industry. The revenues are low, authors get small advances. It's so, which is why, and especially English language publishing, there's other people, the readership is not very high, which is why I think perhaps the kind of, it's what should I say, it's a fairly random, the kind of attention that these books get. So if you honestly look at any of our books, there are books okay, since Sudeep is here, we published his Eastern Gate recently. Now, if you are to really carefully read that book, and you would know exactly what the author's, where he stands as per political ideology and all of that is concerned. And if there is a party which decides to take offense, of course they can. So, but the thing is, it doesn't happen too often, really. I mean, of course, there are instances, just because I think the publishing industry being small, the kind of attention it draws being lesser, it's not the same as the way politically we've had the people who've been imprisoned and all of that. They've been activists more than, I mean, they won't be purely authors. But of course, the thing is that things are changing. People are scared now. There is much more fear. Even when we are signing on books, there's a lot of legal vetting, which was 5 years back. I don't remember wanting to send a book, like any book which seems to have any chance of being inflammatory in any way, you want to get it legally vetted because you're worried about, again, the repercussions. So, and especially as, I don't know, as international publishers, often our hands are tied. I mean, we can't, I mean, I'm not sure how I can, it's not just about me and what I think of a book. There are, again, as in the case of the Hindus, there are so many factors which are coming in when you're publishing something and putting it out there. So, yeah, these things, I mean, I'm sort of, I think if there are any specific questions, we'll come to that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anjali.
Yeah.
I can't help but come to you now, Sudeep Dutt, because as she pointed out, it's one kind of work. It's one kind of work to try to fight for freedom of speech as an institution. Your work is entirely different because you work as an author, as a person. So much research as well goes into work. So what has your experience been like, and how does your work engage with freedom of expression?
Well, I'm a bit of a Trishanku here. My name is Trishanku for more answers, where I'm not like Shikubir here, but I do engage in human rights issues in India and support South Asia. I am, in my mind and body and soul, a working journalist in many ways, and I'm also an author, a writer of books. So in a way, I can try and bridge the bridge with two of my colleagues. As Zaman would know, when she's published my latest book, Please Give, and it's set in a very, very fractious and royal part of the subcontinent, just a piece of Bangladesh, the region that I write about is as the demand would lie, maybe east of Dhaka, northeast of Dhaka. But also Zaman would know very well is that my position is to be an equal opportunity offender, and I'm not scared about that position. And I have put that down in black and white in print in the book that you published. And I don't even know this, but people have taken offense, but not the sort of people that you think have taken offense. The rebel groups that I mentioned in my book have banned me from visiting those areas because I critique the government, I criticize the government, the peace processes, the processes of war, the economies of conflict, and I most definitely criticize the rebels as well. So many parts of Nagaland right now, which is a part of the region that I talked about, and Manipur, in another province. I'm persona non grata with the rebel groups over there. So, see, I've offended people already. But coming in another way, I would, as before, I want to go too deep into this because we can get back to it. I would like to begin my statement by actually paying homage to a very dear friend of mine, an author and a journalist, who was killed by extreme Hindu nationalists back in 2017. We know he called Roy. And I can barely speak her name with the emotional grace. She was shot dead in her house one morning because the past that were and past that continued to be did not like what she was writing, what she was publishing, the way she thought, the way she acted, the way she dressed, and what she wrote. And she died to pay the price for that. 2 years later, not too long after that, there is a gentleman called Kalburagi, who is an author and a rationalist. He was shot dead. There are others in that state. In fact, there were 3 other rationalists and authors who were killed within a very short span. And when I look at people like Siddiq Kaba, a journalist who was jailed for more than 700 days without bail because he went to report on a gang rape of a lady in the Indian province of Uttar Pradesh. And as a preemptive strike, he was put in jail. He just recently released on bail because not given it for over 700 days. This is the situation in India. This is also the situation in many parts of South Asia. When I speak as a writer, I speak as a journalist, I speak as a human rights defender, so I don't know what that term means. I look at a few industries here. I look at the Reporters Without Borders statistic, where Pakistan is placed at 157 in a list of 180 countries. I look at Sri Lanka, which is placed 146 in the list of 180 countries. I look at India, which is, I didn't want to get this wrong, because I definitely India is placed 150 in a list of 180 countries, and where we are right now, Bangladesh is placed 162 in the list of 180 countries. The list of 180 countries end with stalwarts like China, Vietnam, Syria, North Korea. It's not a salutary list that we belong to, and in all these cases, all the countries that are in the have split in these cases from 2021 to 2022. And this is recorded by, in my opinion, a pretty neutral organization that we can call our own, the only organization globally that deals with speech expression, at least in terms of media. So when I'm here on the stage and I speak without fear of failure, and maybe someday I will be a president, but until then, I'm not going to stop. So sue me, come, talk to me, attack me, do what you do. The more you suppress us, and somebody will bear me out of this. Imagine you publish this map, you're on the street literally with people. The more pressure that is put on freedom of speech and expression is even more the reason that gives us the strength of keep fighting for freedom of speech and expression. Now, this may seem like what in Bangla sometimes called Chala and Kolkata, but I frankly, ladies and gentlemen, simply do not give a damn because this needs to be said. And I will stop by saying that, these are threats that humanity has been very elegant about. I'm saying this with full knowledge that you might decline to publish my next book. I'm taking that fully on board. And Salman might like to publish my next article. And you might not want to meet me again. But thank you. Bless you. Even so, these are the times when I'm a small person, small man, with this very tiny example. If these things happen to me, imagine someone like this. I have a stage I'm speaking of. There are people who cannot. My articles on Jammu and Kashmir back in India, in a very, very prestigious publication, why we call it, came back redacted Why? Because I was saying unpopular things for the government to hear, which is that they were pursuing a completely wrong policy about Jammu and Kashmir, that it should not have been become the kind of place that it now is, which is that it's lost its special status. People have entirely lost their human rights. Earlier they partially lost their human rights, now they've completely lost it. So when you write these things, people are not happy. My columns came back redacted. And I insisted they be published because I'm very blunt, I'm a bloody minded writer. So they were published in a redacted form. That's how these are the small battles that we try and fight and we try and win. In the hope of more column inches that we can get, more digital space that we can get, more voice that we can get. And I will end by saying that, in our conversation, we've been talking in a way about how governments react and about how government sponsor or government influence institutions react. But let me categorically state, which is why I brought up the Rituparna example, that if there are state actors, as we call them, who are directly impinging on freedom of speech and expression, they are what in conflict spaces also called non-state actors who impinge on this space. I would also say most categorically that business enterprises often influence articles, books. My own book has been suppressed by many corporations and blinding television stations with the threat of withdrawing advertising because what I wrote was not salutary to a particular business group or the other. And this is just one tiny example that I'm giving for my tiny effort. What about the thousands of writers, tens of thousands of freedom of speech personnel, tens of thousands of media persons across the region, writers, people who speak and wish to speak and to be heard clearly? What about all of us?
Thank you so much, Udipda. Mr. Zafar Sobhan will, as he's just mentioned, he will have to leave us in 5 minutes. So maybe I can come back to you. I had hoped to come to you, Khushi madam. So, just to kind of stream off of what Shudipda has just addressed, that even corporations and their opinions are things that we really have to keep in mind. As a newspaper, I think this is most applicable to your work. How do you have to kind of navigate that space and still go on speaking what must be said? You're on mute again. If you could please unmute.
And newspaper, and I think this is a problem. Now, newspapers, media, of course, are big business, and perhaps there's a discussion to be had as to whether that should be the case or whether that ought not to be the case. But, our newspaper is backed by business houses. I think almost all newspapers are backed by business houses, and that does impose an additional pressure in terms of what one feels comfortable, because one also has to think in terms of the imperatives of the business houses behind. I think, and that's true whether you're going to be, whether you're the Times of London, which is owned by the Murdoch Group, or whether you are ABC News in the US, which is owned by Disney. One of the models which I think is increasingly interesting to me, and it's something which I've actually also discussed with my partners at the Dhaka Tribune. If you look at a newspaper such as The Guardian in the UK, that's actually owned by a charitable trust, the Guardian Trust. Scroll.in is an online portal in India, very good. And they also have a, and The Wire as well. Both of these are structured in such a way to minimize any kind of, I think The Wire is structured as a nonprofit, and The Scroll works on kind of a donation model, though it's technically, I don't think it's organized as a nonprofit. And one of the things we're actually thinking of at the Dhaka Tribune, a way to address this issue and solve this issue is whether it would actually be wise to reorganize ourselves. Is I think the legal entity in Bangladesh, which we would look at, would be called a trust. To reorganize ourselves as a trust, to take back that control, and to make sure that there are so many pressures on free media right now, and we have mentioned that there's the pressure of the government, there's the pressure of society. We're not going to solve all of those problems at once, but if we can at least take away the corporate pressure, that's one less pressure, that's one less external source of friction, which we can at least hope to eliminate. And then that's something which will give us a certain amount of strength to try and address the other issues of freedom of speech. Because I also think there are a number of advantages to this, is that not only does it free us from having to be concerned about the interests of any corporate backers which one might have, it also gives one a better position with which to advocate the case for being allowed to speak one's mind to the government. When you can project yourself, and indeed to your readers, who are, you know, your sort of your ultimate public, when you say, well, look, you know, we are not just you know, one of the critiques of any newspaper can be, well, you know, who's behind you? And if you can make the argument credibly, well, look, I don't have any corporate entity behind me. I don't have any big money behind me. So the only thing which is motivating what is behind this newspaper is really, you know, our intellectual ideas and our the viewpoints which we're trying. There's no agenda. Not only do I think that makes us extremely would make us extremely attractive to readers, I also think it gives one a better vantage point with which to advocate one's case for freedom of expression to the government. And as I've mentioned, I think two of the really best publications in India and also one in the UK have similar structures. And as a sort of parenthetically, you know, there's a lot of financial pressure on newspapers. I mean, this is a reality of the last few decades. And I think one of the ways to solve all of these problems is to move towards a non-profit model. And I think maybe that it's not going to solve all of our problems in the media, but I suspect in the coming decade, we're going to see more and more media houses consider this. Because I think while it will not solve all of our problems, it will go a long way to at least addressing some of the concerns we have both internally and externally. And it will put us on a more solid footing moving forward. So that is something which is a concern. I mean, I think it is a legitimate concern. And this is one where I think we can actually address the issue moving forward, which will be good not only for the media houses. I think it'll be good. It'll have a lot of knock-on effects for various sort of ancillary industries, and it may actually be a good model to really try and think of how can we advocate the strongest for freedom of expression is if we move away from a corporate platform to a non-profit or a charitable trust-based platform.
Yes, please go ahead.
Zafar, before you run away,
Yep.
short question.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you that given that we were under this during Pakistan's time and during total control, etc., your father and others with him had started this journal. Okay, it's not mainstream media, it wasn't populist, but it was extremely, I mean, they managed to do it, and it was something that we all, even now, anyone who wants to study the history and what the thoughts of the time, really go back to that. Is that something one can think of now at this current time? Or, I mean, I was interested in your ideas of what one can do as an alternative and a free media. And I wanted to.
Well, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, maybe. So you're talking a forum which was in publication under the editorship of Dr. Hamida Hussain for about 2 years before it was shut down on the 25th of March in 1971. The last edition came out on the 20th of March, and the next one would have come out on the 27th. But of course, Operation Searchlight intervened, and the rest is, of course, a very bloody history, which we all know. We did, when I was at the Daily Star, we did, in fact, resuscitate Forum under my editorship, and it was quite a successful magazine, and it did fairly well. And then I think after I moved away from the Daily Star group, I think, if I'm not wrong, Hannah Shams Ahmed, who you may know, she took over the editorship and did a very good job with it in my estimation. And we were able to run it, but I think at the end, that has now been shut down. And I think the reason it was shut down is because, again, everyone's really kind of looking at the bottom line. They're looking at in terms of, well, is it paying its way? And I think that's the problem. I mean, I think as long as that is going to be our, as long as that's going to be our criteria for deciding whether we publish something, whether we continue to bring something out, that is, that's a self-defeating viewpoint. That's a self-defeating criteria to use. And so I think it's very important for us to then move away from the notion that, look, of course, salaries have to be paid. This is absolutely true. And, it is a business at the end of the day. And, you can't ask people to, to pour money into a losing entity year in, year out. And I'm sympathetic to that, and I do understand it. But at the end of the day, if we look at media solely as a business, and if the only thing motivating us is profit and loss in the bottom line, I think ultimately, A, it's no longer sustainable, and B, I just don't think you are providing that service, that function which a media is needed to provide, which the general public look to the media to provide. And then, as I said, in the final analysis, it also, then if you're looking for the government to give you freedom and space, you also need to be able to tell them that, look, I'm not just a profit-making entity like all of the others. I need special consideration and treatment. And it's harder to make that argument when you are, at the end of the day, just a sort of a corporate profit-making entity like all others. So I do think we need to move beyond that mentality. It's not an easy problem to solve. It's not an easy circle to square. And as I said, and I do have sympathy for owners of media houses, because I do understand that they are, that they have their own financial imperatives as well. And that's why I think that a model which may work is to think about media is, move it away from the for-profit sector, which I think is corrupting in many ways, and try and reimagine the media as a public good, reimagine the media is something which exists outside of the profit of the profit motive. And then I think we will be able to provide our public, our readers, our viewers, our listeners with the level of discourse which I really think any country or any people deserve. And I also think it will go some way towards helping to open up that space from regulation, from the authorities, from the government, which we so want. I think it may be a solution for the future. And getting back to your point, Kushi, I absolutely agree that we cannot lose sight of the greater goal of what we're doing in this industry. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Zafar sir. One topic that Shreeda, you mentioned non-state parties playing a role. I think my question is to all four of you, whoever would like to chime in. Governments are one factor, corporate houses are one factor, but the other thing is social media, whether we're publishers, whether we're media houses, even if we are authors in this day and age who are trying to maintain social media presence, we're constantly kind of being driven by digital views and by the algorithm. And as a result of that, we inevitably have to pander to whatever thought or opinion is popular out there, and so in the case of books, we often have to publish certain kinds of books if we even want to stay financially afloat. And the same thing goes for media houses. The same thing, I don't know how much it applies to individual authors, but Shreeda, do you have an opinion on that? And I'd like to hear from all four of you.
Well, I will speak very, very short. I stand up for my friends in lieu of self-profile. So I'll keep it very quick now. I think, you're absolutely right to bring up that this is about social media showing a sort of a virus to infect freedom of expression of the virus, and ironically shutting it down, right? But I think the antidote lies in this particular case in social media itself. For instance, if there is, and here I would subscribe to the surface views. But I found a lot of new voices coming out, a lot of brave, insistent voices, resolute voices coming out across the world, and certainly in the region and in Bangladesh as well, where we are right now. The digital space, using online, using social media to create their blogs and other forums of expression, not being cowed down by the hacking of bloggers a few years ago. Any longer, definitely affected people. People were like low for a while, but you cannot stop the flow of legit, bona fide, non-selfishness, well-intentioned, honest opinion, news, views. You cannot stop that. That is a lifeblood of freedom of expression, right? And I think online media is also where the fight back is taking place against the virulence that exists in online media. I mean, there is a counteraction to what we see online, and that battle is being fought online. So, there is a, we can go a little deeper into it. I will stop now. And we lost Anjali as well.
I think she's back again, though.
She's there, and maybe there you go back. I was for a while I was wondering whether the economic situation in India is so dire that the capital of India, the Republic of India, the glorious Republic of India, to which you and I belong, is shutting down its electricity supply. But I'm mollified. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. I'm just testing the freedom of speech and expression. That's all.
Thank you, Shadibda. Khushi ma'am, if I could come to you, circle back to you and to the interest you expressed regarding the title of this event. We thought it was very interesting that we called it Truth or Dare. And one has to dare to speak the truth in today's climate. And, to say certain things, to protest for certain things includes very real, tangible, personal risks and threats. So, where does one's responsibility lie? Towards one's own safety, towards one's family's safety, or towards the idea and concept of freedom of speech?
That's it's a very good question, and a question that is quite deep. It's very easy for one to just be have a lot of bravado and say, you do what you believe in, and you go ahead and do it without fear. And, personally, if one asks, I would fall in that category. But I think the fact that people have responsibilities and that some of your action may impact other people, and that may create that your action has impacted someone so negatively, is a responsibility that you have to take into consideration. And I think the question you asked is very deep, as I said. But the fact is that if I link it to the earlier question with the social media, etc., you see the social media impact and what you get is often something that has been created. If you have a certain belief and you have a certain position, you get your whole group to keep writing so much that you think that the social media and the number of likes you got, or the number of comments you got, the number of hate speeches you got, that's it. It isn't. It's not. It's people who are creating that kind of situation to make you think you have so many people who reacted. So I think you have to realize that. And when you talk about the hackers, etc., people who have been hacked because of their belief. I mean, one of the people who were killed was a publisher who did not subscribe or ascribe to the same viewpoints as his friend, who was the author, OBG, whose books he published. It's just that he was a friend, and OBG's books had a good, reading and group. And so, with both these two things in mind, he published OBG's book. But he was one who believed in OBG's personal viewpoint. yet he was killed. So the fact is that, it's a risk. He didn't think that he would fall that risk because he was not someone who was vocal, as someone who was a free thinker, as someone who was an atheist, or anything like that at all. On the contrary. But, those are risks that many of the people who were killed were killed. A teacher at Rajshahi University who just believed in nothing but Sufism and the Baul was killed. He wasn't an atheist. He didn't have a huge following, but the little that he had was enough as a threat for people who wanted to kill him, either that he was a threat or to give a message to others that he would do that. So that risk remains, and people who take this on, and I think it's important that there will be people who take this on, and it has happened through the ages, through centuries. All the people we revere now, we talk about Professor Ferdous. She faced a lot of, she faced so much criticism, harassment, and ostracization. In fact, she was not even allowed to be buried in Calcutta because of the kind of books she wrote. Today we celebrate her. We have awards in her name. But while she was alive, she took the risk of writing what she believed in, knowing that this is something that. So I think this is something that everybody who believes in something quite strongly should go ahead. There will always be an opposing view. There has always been opposing views. There have always been controversies. There have always been cases trying to ban books, literature, which are now being taught as literature. When they were first published, had to go through court cases, even in England, etc. So I think what I'm trying to say is that it's so important that you stand up for what you believe in. And no one's asking anyone to be foolhardy, but if you have a full commitment and belief, you take a risk. There's nothing you can do without taking a risk. You take a risk at the moment you get out of the house, you may be run over. The number of people who die in road accidents is much higher than people who many other forms of deaths. So you may be killed. We don't know how this building was constructed. It may have a weakness, and the ceiling may fall down just now. And so you take a risk. You stop staying somewhere, you stop breathing because you're going to get cancer because it's so polluted. You take a risk anyway in your life, that's just by living. So I think if you have the conviction of belief, you know you have people who don't believe, like I don't agree with a lot of point of view, with the shrinking of the lack of tolerance. I don't have tolerance for certain kinds of viewpoints. That doesn't mean I kill them. That doesn't mean I unclothe them or attack them. I may have lack of tolerance because I don't believe in that. Like they may not believe in the way I think or I would. So the thing is that if you have the commitment and the conviction, it's important that you do that. And I just want to mention Shuddha Shore. I don't know how many of you know this publishing house that used to be called Shuddha Shore. Shuddha Shore, the first publisher, was somebody who was hacked, but luckily did not die because enough people came on time. There was enough people at the hospital to ensure that the emergency services saved him. He had 2 visitors, which the attackers didn't know, which sort of, so he could survive. He went off, he's now in exile, but he's publishing online Shuddha Shore without compromising, even stronger. And he's decided now to go publish, what do you call it, paper,
digitally? To
Yeah,
publish digital
publishing
or
actually.
in print? Okay.
Yeah, not just online.
I love this one. You said publishing. I love this expression. That's
I don't know
your
what to call it. Yes.
No,
So-
it is actually a purpose. That is
Actually
the
publish.
actual purpose.
So something that remains and not something that's only read virtually. So he's doing that. And he's continuing, even if it's in a country where no one speaks Bangla, when he brings out his journal, it's bilingual. So the conviction is, despite the fact that he was hacked, that he escaped narrowly, that he is now in exile, he still continues. And I think that is what we need to have more people like that.
Thank you so much, Khushi Madam. Himanjali, I'd like to return to you at this point. You mentioned that books are very different from the output of media houses in that they remain, as Khushi Madam also said, when you have something tangible, it remains. The work that goes into that also is a longer stretch of time. So as a publisher, as someone who curates the books that comes out in South Asia, how do you decide on who gets to speak on behalf of what, what voices get representation, what topics, particular voices are allowed to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we all know that representation itself is a very contentious area now because of who is allowed to speak about certain, whether it's a region or a topic or a theme. But I mean, I personally believe, I don't believe in cancel culture, and I do believe that we all have a right to speak about what we want to speak about. And if I feel strongly about a certain issue or theme, I should be allowed to speak about it, regardless of my, like basically as a woman, maybe as a woman, I should not be speaking about men. I mean, just like in, I have to take it to a slightly extreme position. Maybe as a woman writer, I should not be writing a novel from a male perspective. I mean, it's not come to that yet, but it could. So I don't believe in that. And I also write for children. So I have an earlier book where my central protagonist is homosexual. And I was just thinking I wrote that book about 11, 12 years back. And I wonder whether it would be accepted now, because as a cis heterosexual person, am I allowed to talk about these things anymore? I mean, those are, and of course, to a certain extent, I completely get it. I mean, that there is like when I'm talking about people who is not me, there can be either I can be romanticizing, or I could be, there are many pitfalls, and it is much harder to do. It is definitely harder for anyone to write anything that is outside their own personal sphere of experiences. And so, yeah, when it comes to commissioning also, of course, if I'm commissioning a book on feminism, I would rather have a woman writer than a male. I mean, those are very obvious kind of choices that we make. But whether, and it's just like, maybe these are safer choices also, because the perspective will be correct. I mean, you imagine it will be correct. There's more chances of it being more accurate. So yeah, these are things which we are constantly sort of battling now. And I think it's more so now. And maybe in many ways, it might be a good thing also, because it's important that things are represented correctly. So there's no, and of course, censorship and banning of books, all of that has been going on forever. It's just the way in the last, now, of course, with all the majoritarian governments that are, the fascist regimes that we are living under, things have come to a head, maybe in many ways. And that's why we are all very self-conscious of what we are saying, what we are doing, how we are behaving. But the fact is that these things have been happening. I mean, there's this in children's literature, bans of, at a sort of, not like, say, schools are banning books every second day. Apparently, they'll say they don't want to invite an author who has a certain point of view. Apparently, I remember reading somewhere that in 1988, I think, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was banned because it had a poor philosophy of life. this was in the US. I mean, so I mean, these are like almost funny to sort of know about now. And even there was one, I don't know which year that is. I'm assuming it's at least hopefully far back in the past, but apparently Wizard of Oz was once like it came under the scanner for having women in strong leadership roles. So things like that in books which are like yeah. So it's kind of so okay, there's one thing of course believing strongly about something and taking sort of expressing that, but often I think even as a writer you don't know where you're going to be critiqued. I mean, where you're going to be, how, I mean, things can spiral in ways that you don't expect or anticipate, and you have to be ready for that. I mean, when M.F. Hussain was drawing Saraswati in the nude, when all Hindu gods are nude anyway, I mean, as in, okay, they aren't, but there is a tendency to like say Kali or whatever, the gods and goddesses did not have the best sartorial, they didn't make the best sartorial choices ever and we are allowed to represent them in any way we want, but these have been, of course, it's all of this is now problematic and you can't talk about it, and I just did, which I shouldn't have, but yeah, so yeah, okay, I think I'll stop here.
Don't stop, don't stop.
I shouldn't have. That is a dead giveaway when you say, I'm saying it here, but I shouldn't have. That's self-censorship.
Yeah.
So we will call it educating service.
Thank you so much, Manjali. This conversation can, of course, go on and on, but I think at this point we can open it up to the audience. If we have any questions for any of our speakers, if you could just raise your hand if you have a question, we can bring a mic to you.
And you think that the rise of citizens and the patronization on the part of politicians, the negotiation between these two forces, is this negotiation responsible for the rising of intolerance towards free thinkers or writers all over the world? It's not a local problem, it's a global problem. So, do you think is this negotiation between the rise of this fundamentalism and politics is responsible really this intolerance towards the free thinkers?
Just for me?
Yes,
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
I think that's a very important question you have raised, interesting. Actually, I'll be very frank and I'll give you my own perception and my views. Politicians or political parties often use religion as a means of trying to get, I mean, all political parties try to win as many people as they can on their side, so they have a large number of people there. And they use religion as a way of trying to make inroads and get more people on their side. Whatever, whether it's using Islam in Bangladesh because that's the majoritarian religion in this country, whether it's Hindutva in India, whether it's Christianity in the West, whether it's Buddhism in Sri Lanka or Myanmar. So it's whatever the religion is, it's the use of religion. And when you want to try and control people's minds without giving them the choice to decide how and which way they want to practice religion. Like, I'll give you an example, because this is Bangladesh, I speak about Islam. If I was in India, I would be speaking about this horrible Hindutva, you know, what is a flood that's absolutely engulfed everybody. But here, every religion has many different sects, many different divisions, many different interpretations. You know, when Himanjali was talking about, you know, laws that are against, which we also have, affect your religious sentiments or your, then you have the, which started with the British. So it's all these are open to interpretation. Now, how you interpret religion is also open to interpretation. And that's why we have all these differences. But when you pander and give it to religion and only one kind of religious, you know, explanation and viewpoint, and that means you're negating all the others that exist. You start questioning that, are you really talking about religion? Are you talking about religion? Is the person who wants to be discussing religion has the choice to decide what, not only what religion, but what interpretation or what school of that particular religion they want to follow or not, whatever religion it is. So it is using that, and that is very much aligned because you don't want people to think, you don't want people to question, and so then you start talking about intolerance. Majoritarianism leads to intolerance. And when you ensure and insist only on majoritarianism and not listening to a pluralistic viewpoint and not open to pluralistic views, I think that's wrong. I think even people like us who claim ourselves to be totally secular, if we block our mind to people who have a religious perception and not want to listen to what their viewpoints are, that is also wrong, because then I'm also of the same ilk. But the thing is that we may have our own perception and our own views and our own beliefs and our own position, but we should have the right to be able to understand that there may be others who are different and who have different views. So yes, politics and political parties, it's not politics, it's actually political parties who use religion as a means of gaining popularity. It's just a populist approach. It's not that they believe. You see how each party is compromising as much as they can with religious groups to try and show that they're more religious than the other, and how much they're in favor of trying to project. How people have the right, they feel they have the right to be able to go and tear down a woman's dress or make comments about a woman's wearing a tee, or attack and put up placards saying that why are you wearing clothes that are not part of our heritage and culture, whereas they are wearing extremely tight t-shirts and pants and wearing, I mean, with all due respect to people who wear the hijab and the burqa and the abaya, they're doing it out of their own choice. But then to say this is our culture and heritage is not true. This is an alien or a Western or from outside dress that you have chosen to take up. Just as someone who's wearing jeans and t-shirt is a Western dress that they have decided to take up, just like men have decided to take up. So all that's not, you know, look at the, think of these people wearing but if they're talking of traditional and our heritage, none of them are wearing anything that is part of our, you know, their dress code, their appearance is not of our heritage and culture. And then stating somebody else cannot be. They are determining and deciding what is our heritage and culture instead of what history and even photographs of 20 years back tell us what our heritage and culture is. So yes, you're absolutely true, and I think it's time that every one of us, all of you in the room, those who are listening in and those who will be listening in the future, start thinking that we need to think instead of just following. And it's really important that we do learn to be tolerant. And I think pluralism is, and multiculturalism and pluralism is really required for any society to grow and flourish. This is, I think, I'll answer your question.
Thank you so much, Khushi Madam. Do we have any other questions? Okay, yes, please.
I just feel that, what is the impact of all of this having on the young generation, the youth, who are the future citizens? Because that's something that you said, that when we were young, we did this. I mean, it's not just about speaking, that young people are not speaking on contentious issues related to religion or politics, but they're not speaking at all. As citizens, they're not complaining, just apathetic. They're just letting, for example, the whatever the city corporation or government, affect their lives, and they just don't feel that they have any. I mean, they've been kind of like brought up to be fearful about talking out, particularly criticizing any powerful. There's always a threat of violence. And I'm just fearful of this next generation growing up with this environment where they're just going to keep quiet. And then that space will be taken up by, more extremist people. And they will have to live in that world. And they just keep quiet. And they are the majority. Sorry, this is like my statement, not but please comment on this. I just want to end with that picture of about 7, religious people holding up placards criticizing women's right to wear what they want. Only 7 of them. When in many countries there would be 1,000 people opposite them with equal placards, protesting their right to wear. Where are those 1,000? That's what I'm worried about. Like even when the Ku Klux Klan went through the University of Virginia, in Charlottesville, so many people came and they took them on and just came out of the streets and said, no, they're not going to have a free day. We are going to be there to protest. So that's what I'm worried about. Comment about the effect of the youth.
No, that's really very important. But as the person who's moderating, I would be very interested to hear what the 2 Indian people have to say, because I see, so I have a lot of friends in India. A lot of them are a lot of friends. So I would like both your response to that. I'm definitely.
Ask the question to him as well.
Yes, please do, sir.
So in every Western university's campuses, you see the free speech orders. Like, those born again Christians shouting at the mall and everything. So would ULAB allow someone, and speak of their minds, at ULAB?
You can start the question. But that's general. That's very.
I got your point. I think it's very important. That's why I was there.
So the reason
The largest democracy in the world, how the young people are responding.
Can I just add to that? The reason I asked this because it's very important, because when Sarah was asking this question at the comfort zone, because I write a column for the Daily Star, right? And my wife works for the government, so she's a civil servant. And I did not write a column for 7 to 8 years because of my wife's profession. No, because I had to respect her profession, and our job would have been in jeopardy, given my freedom of speech. So how do you negotiate? So it's easy to talk the talk, but sometimes we have to make choices. The bravado that you mentioned, ma'am, you're absolutely right that some of the people was saying that this Jalamoi Potrika. So yes, it's difficult to make that choice, and I have to so negotiate with Asha, the operating people there in the Daily Star, so they will come come back to me and saying that, would you tone down this particular sentence? Do you mind that if we rewrite this particular sentence? And there are occasions in which they have rewritten the titles like, without my own knowledge. And like, I have to be uncomfortable with the title, the way it has been written. For example, last week, the way PCL was mentioned in the title, that was not my original title, right? So the ownership of speech, like, so sometimes like, so for example, I'm sharing this week, same speech at the University of Large. And like, if somebody comes up and says that, oh, this is group representation, or like, you're not supposed to say this, you're not supposed to say that, you have to come through a proper channel. And the same is like everywhere, like, so if you do not have democracy, like, the key idea is that the plurality that you talked about, that comes from democratic norms. So if you do not have those institutions practiced, like, in your home, in your family, like in society, so then, like, we talk about why can't we resist those 7 students wearing abayas or hijabs? So we have 7,000 students. Why can't they just, like, overshadow them? But then again, we are entering into the cancel culture that Aanchal was talking about, and we are living in a post-truth. And this post-truth, like, everybody has access to social media, and everybody has access or his or her own version of truth. So the person who's posting online, so he thinks that this is his truth. This is based on the Bible, this is based on the Quran, and I might say that this is based on my science. So where is truth? And especially in perception or knowledge or orientation or background or discipline. Yeah.
There's so many different views and interpretations.
Right. So it's all about mutual respect. And so what the last point I would like to make is that do we respect the other? So, like, in order to understand the truth, so the first thing that we need to appreciate is that, so we need to have mutual respect. And that, unfortunately, is missing, so in one of our practices that we have, around us. Thank you.
Sharita, you wanted to respond?
I think great courage and encouragement from the very simple fact that we are in a stressed country in some ways, and we're in a stressed region in some ways, but I'm really, really happy that we can, for instance, have this conversation in Dhaka at this forum, going live, streaming live, with, I sincerely hope, minimal liabilities, psychological and physical and emotional. This conversation would not be taking place, I think, in Yangon. It would certainly not be taking place in Beijing. And there I go ruining my host country's foreign relations. But something's need to be said. This conversation would not be taking place in Moscow. There I go ruining my host country's foreign relations straight away. It's very, very important. We, from, I think, in certain parts of India, for instance, in India, I speak here as a citizen of India, and that ruins my chances of going back home when I reach the target probably. When, for instance, there are certain parts of India where this conversation will not be taking place, for instance, in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. This conversation which has been taking place very freely, without fear or favor, in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, which many South Asians look down upon, certainly my country, men and women sometimes look down upon. This conversation would not be taking place in many places in Central India, which is stressed, in many places in Northeastern India, which is stressed, and as I just mentioned, the erstwhile province, Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. It would not be taking place. So I think pride in that, in the ability to speak, something freedom of
young people in the States,
yes.
would the young people in any of the states, would they, the kind of response that Imran is talking about,
Yes.
would you have that kind of swell and response?
Indeed, ma'am. In fact, much people tell me of this is published. In the last year and a half, there's been a spate of young people writing, for instance, from Jammu and Kashmir. We mentioned that right now. Kashmiris, men and women. In fact, more women than men, which is immensely gratifying to me personally, because that talks about an absolutely fearless groundswell where they're battling government and patriarchy all at once. There's been an upswell of writing and poetry, plays, film scripts, short stories, non-fiction from Kashmiri writers, for instance, in the Kashmiri language, in English, and in translation, which has been published in media, in the publishing industry. Imagine, would you agree with me on that?
Yeah.
They've been running awards, and people across the country, young, middle-aged, elderly, hopeful, idealistic, are standing up for them and taking great umbrage if they are fighting back against their trolling online, and were any of them to be jailed or censured. There is a groundswell among the young. I'm very glad to see the university students, sometimes even high school kids, and young professionals, media people, journalists, and so on and so forth, who are actually pushing back now. And that gives me strength. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I don't know if Aanchal would agree with me or not. This is something that I personally take great strength from.
Anjali, would you like to add to that?
No, could you just, I mean, I couldn't hear fully. I couldn't hear properly. Could, Sarah, if you can just tell me what exactly did Sudeep say? I couldn't get the full.
I said many things, so we will come to chase.
Yeah.
Essentially, there is a pushback that is happening, perhaps not as much that there ought to be, but there is a pushback happening against institutional trolling, hate, and government dominance, which controls the birthdays, freedom of speech and expression, particularly in stressed areas like Kashmir. So there is a pushback that is happening.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah, so there is pushback happening in regions where there is, of course, all the there's more reason for people to fight back, and they are doing that because people are also, I think, too tired at some level to care about what happens to them at a personal level. So they are fighting back much more than was the case some years back. And even, I mean, of course, I also a little bit disagree with younger people not being, I mean, was that being said? Because it's, you know, some of it is coming a little muffled, so I'm not able to hear everything very clearly. But what I got the sense was that younger people are not speaking out, which is not true, was it?
I said,
No, not you. I thought the person, I mean, who was speaking said that it's like, was it said that younger people are now, I mean, they're kind of hesitant to express, to be involved in politics?
Context. He was speaking in Bangladesh context, and the question was to me that I wanted a response from the Indians.
Okay.
We responded.
Okay. No, so no, I just wanted to say that in India, because I've been pleasantly surprised when I've been to, you know, like a Shaheen Bagh or when in Jantar Mantar there are gatherings, there's so many young people now. I mean, one sees that younger people are very involved politically. So, yeah.
Can you simply add a tiny point and then we just stop? Is that, you know, the volume of hate, trolling, and domination, and just sampling of freedom of expression that we deal with in India. I can't speak for Bangladesh, and in Nepal, Pakistan, Myanmar for sure. There's a living example. It's just next door. The sheer volume of it that one has to deal with. So while I think again great pride while accepting, standing up for the fact that people are pushing back, the momentum to push back that hate, domination, command and control, and trolling that takes place to absolutely dominate the narrative, which kills, which an attempt to kill freedom of speech and expression. I don't think has achieved the kind of momentum that free thinkers, and I hate to use that term, but at least people who look out for freedom of speech and expression. I don't think we have achieved that critical mass yet, which will guarantee freedom of speech and expression for most people in the region, or at least in certain countries. So I'm hoping that this groundswell that we're talking about morphs into a far greater kind of push against this kind of intolerance.
I'll respond to you, Inma, and I thought that was a very important question you raised. But I'll just add, I belong to a few regional groups that we meet regularly online. And I'm very impressed with especially on the Kashmir issue, on both sides of the Kashmir, people writing on this, which is totally contrary to their state's narrative about Kashmir, on both sides of the Kashmir, not just the Indian side of the Kashmir, on the other side too. And I'm very pleased that I have had the opportunity to have met with them again online, but it has given me a lot of strength and a lot of, hope. Within Bangladesh, I'll just say that, like what you said, that it hasn't morphed into the kind of groundswell that we would like. If it had, I think the kind of parties that are being elected in our countries would not be elected the way they have been, if this groundswell had been as much as we wanted the groundswell to be. Because in our countries, the young are the majority of the voters now, still. And so, but that doesn't mean there haven't been instances. If we remember 2013 and the Shahbag 2013 was not just, it started with the trial of the war criminals, but the issues that were raised, the slogans that were raised, and I was really impressed, like, Tumi ke, Ami ke, Adibashi Bangali, would never have happened before. I don't know if, Evangeline, you understand Bangla at all?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. I am Bengali.
Adivasis here are a very small minority, they're about 1% of the population, and they're not being allowed to be called indigenous Adivasis, and they're never considered. They're all, because it's again majoritarianism. So when in 2013 there was this huge, really huge, and it went for months. It really lasted for months. The kind of slogans that came out showed the kind of, their political perception and understanding of, inclusion. The other one was usually it's always bhai, and everything is bhai. So here they would talk about bhai and bon. Gore tolo andolon, esho bhai, esho bon, gore tuli andolon. So, the fact that they were thinking, and then amader dhammonite janarai mame rakto, amader dhammonite pritilata rakto, bringing in women also as people who are people that we look up to. And so they had that shown, but Shahbag didn't remain forever. And where are all the people who were in Shahbag, who's hundreds and thousands who were in Shahbag? Where are they now? That's your question also. You didn't ask about Shahbag, right? I said Shahbag just showed that they are there, but they're not on the streets now. You have a handful, but we still have, if I see when I work in the villages, and I do most of my work in the villages. We were doing some short videos, and we asked some group of people to go to the villages to talk to the adolescents we work with, so they get an idea when they're doing the video of what is the level of understanding of the people that they're doing the video for. And they came back and they said, we would never have this kind of discussions, open discussions, or even on sexuality in Dhaka as we had in these villages with these young girls and boys. So those give me hope when I see that. I see a number of young girls who have gone against their parents. They left their home because their father was forcing her to get married to her rapist. She ran away. She asked the police for help, and she left, and she took refuge, and then the police got in touch with other organizations who provide support. and she's committed to studying and getting a degree and standing on her own and not going back to London. I've seen a girl stand up, and when her father tried to change her birth certificate, create a new birth certificate, she challenged him and went to school and got her birth certificate at the time of admission, which showed that the date was that she's not 18. So when they're challenging their own parents, it may sound easy, but it's not. You think of, put yourself as a kid who lives in a village in a conservative area where social constraints and strong norms and all are very much prevalent, and you challenge that as a young kid of 15, 16, that takes a lot of courage. And that happens. I see that happening. So yes, it's not that big swell. But the fact that these kids who have no background of a support system are able to do this gives me great hope that if we can provide a support system, things will change. I don't think majority of the people who are quiet because they're, uninterested or apathetic. I think they're quiet because they do not have the idea now of what can they do or what should they do, which would make a difference. And I'm waiting for the day when the swell becomes more than a swell, it becomes a roar.
Thank you so much, Khushi Madam. I think that is a wonderful note to end the evening on, one of solidarity and courage and encouragement. I would like to thank all of our speakers again for joining us today. Himanjali Shankar, Shudipda, as always, Khushi Madam, and Mr. Zafar Sobhan. And also our audience, Imran Sir, Professor Imran Rahman, Vice Chancellor of ULAB. And we do have some snacks for all of you out in the lobbies. And I would actually like to thank Bookworm Bangladesh and ULAB Press, who are here with their books. So please buy some books, talk to each other, get some snacks, and maybe this conversation can continue off stage. Thank you so much and have a good evening.
Open them out because the VC is sitting here. Like to talk to us.
Please do, please do. Can we get a picture with all of our speakers and Imran Sir, Shamshad Sir, Arifa Ma'am on stage?
Thanks very much. We have
Thank you.
Snacks, so you can visit us in Dhaka and then you can take the chat.
Yes, I'd love to meet you.
Yes, I think I'm feeling a little bit of what is it called, FOMO now, because you all are going to continue and have your little tea and sort of photography session. So yeah, I hope we meet someday. And yeah, so I think I should leave. I should sign out now. And this was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.